The war did not end with an explosion for him. It ended with silence. Private Johann Keller was only 23 when the front collapsed around him. The Eastern Front, winter of 1944. A frozen world of broken weapons, shattered units, and men who no longer believed in victory. Only survival. Snow covered everything. Bodies, tanks, dreams. Johann had not eaten properly in 3 days. His rifle felt heavier than his own bones. Around him, his unit was gone. Some dead, some fled. Some simply disappeared into the white void. When Soviet voices echoed through the trees, Johann did not raise his weapon. He dropped it, not because he was a coward, but because the war had already taken everything from him. Hands shaking, breath visible in the freezing air, Johann stepped forward with his hands raised. For a moment he expected a bullet. Instead, rough hands pulled him down, stripped him of his coat, his watch, his identity. In that moment, Johann Keller stopped being a soldier. He became a prisoner, and he had no idea that surviving the war would be harder than fighting it. That night, packed into a frozen cattle wagon with dozens of other captured men, Johann realized a terrifying truth. I am alive, but I may never be free again. The train moved east, toward camps no one spoke about, toward hunger, disease, and years stolen from life. This was only the beginning. The morning did not begin with orders. It began with kicks. Johann Keller was dragged out of the cattle wagon before dawn. The air cut into his lungs like broken glass. Snow fell softly, almost peacefully, mocking the misery below it. Move! That single word was shouted in a language he barely understood, but its meaning was universal. They were lined up. Hundreds of prisoners, barely recognizable as soldiers anymore. No proper boots, torn coats, faces hollowed by hunger and fear. Some were wounded, some were sick. None were prepared for what came next. The march began without explanation, no destination, no maps, no mercy. The endless road. They walked for hours, then days. Johann's feet went numb first, then his legs, then his thoughts. Each step became an act of will. Men stumbled constantly. When someone fell, guards shouted. If he didn't rise fast enough, the column moved on without him. Johann learned quickly not to look back. Looking back meant seeing things the mind could never forget. A man collapsing into the snow. Another begging for water that did not exist. Someone whispering a mother's name before falling silent. No graves were dug. The snow buried everything. Hunger as a weapon. Food was not given daily. Sometimes not for 2 days. Sometimes longer. When bread finally came, it was a single frozen block shared between 5 men. Johann broke his portion slowly, saving crumbs like treasure. Hunger changed men, not into monsters, but into shadows. Conversations disappeared. Jokes died. Hope shrank into a single thought. Just survive today. One night, Johann watched a man next to him chew on leather straps from his own boots. Another sucked melted snow from a rag. No one judged. The first death beside him. On the 5th day, a young soldier named Eric collapsed beside Johann. He couldn't have been more than 18. I can't feel my legs, Eric whispered. Johann tried to lift him. The guard shouted. Johann let go. That was the moment something inside him broke. Not loudly, but permanently. Eric did not stand again. The column moved forward. Johann walked on with tears frozen on his cheeks, realizing a terrifying truth. Survival here meant learning when not to help, becoming a number. By the end of the march, Johann no longer felt human. Names were not used. Ranks meant nothing. Identity was gone. They were counted like cargo. When the gates of the camp finally appeared, barbed wire stretching endlessly, guard towers cutting the sky. Johann felt no relief, only dread, because deep down he understood. The march was not the punishment. It was only the introduction. That night, lying on a wooden plank inside an overcrowded barrack, Johann stared at the ceiling and thought, if this is living, how do people die here? Outside, the wind howled. Inside, hope whispered, barely alive. Life in the camp did not begin with rules. It began with realization. Johann Keller realized on his first morning that time itself behaved differently here. Days stretched endlessly. Nights crushed the soul, and hope became dangerous, because it hurt when it died. The barracks were wooden skeletons barely holding together. Snow crept inside through cracks in the walls. Dozens of men were packed into spaces meant for half that number. Bodies pressed together for warmth, yet still freezing. The air smelled of sickness, sweat, and quiet despair. The routine of survival. Every morning started with counting. Men were dragged out into the open yard before sunrise. Some stood, some were carried, some did not wake up at all. Those who couldn't stand were pulled aside. Johann stopped asking what happened to them. Hunger ruled everything. The daily ration, if it came, was a thin soup that barely deserved the name. Water with floating shadows of something once edible. Bread arrived rarely and disappeared instantly. Men learned to eat slowly, not to enjoy, but to trick the stomach. Johann broke his bread into tiny pieces, hiding some in his sleeve. Not because he planned ahead, but because hunger taught paranoia. Disease without names. Typhus spread like fire. So did dysentery. Coughing never stopped. Fever burned through the barracks. There was no medicine, no doctors, no mercy. A man could be speaking in the evening and be gone by morning. Johann watched his bunkmate, Karl, shake through the night. By dawn, Karl was still, his eyes open, his breath gone. The body remained until evening. No one cried. Tears required energy, guards and power. Some guards were brutal, others were simply empty. They shouted orders they barely cared about. Violence came without emotion, worse than anger. Johann learned when to lower his eyes, when to move faster, when to disappear into the crowd. Intelligence, not strength, kept him alive. A wrong glance could earn a beating. Silence became protection. Brotherhood in hell. Yet even here, something human survived. Men whispered stories of home, of bread fresh from ovens, of children they feared had forgotten their faces. Johann shared a corner of his soup with an older man named Friedrich, who once taught history. Remember this, Friedrich said quietly. If we survive, we must tell the world what this place was. Johann nodded, unsure if survival was even possible, losing the sense of time. Days blended together. Weeks vanished. Winter refused to end. Johann scratched lines into the wood above his bunk, not to count days, but to remind himself he still existed. Sometimes he dreamed of walking freely. Sometimes he woke screaming. The camp did not need walls to imprison them. Fear did the job. One night, Johann realized something terrifying. He could no longer imagine the future, only the next meal, the next count, the next breath. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "Endure," because the war was still, the camp was not meant to kill quickly. It was designed to wear men down. Johann Keller understood this the moment they were assigned to labor details. The guards didn't shout with anger. They issued commands with boredom, as if breaking human bodies was just another task in their day. Every morning before sunrise, prisoners were pulled from the barracks and divided into work groups. Forests, roads, ruins, anywhere strength was needed. Strength the prisoners no longer had. Work beyond strength. Johann was sent to clear rubble from bombed structures near the camp. Stones heavier than his body, tools worn down to metal skeletons, hands bled constantly, backs bent permanently. Breaths came shallow and painful. Stopping was not an option. A man who slowed was shouted at. A man who collapsed was kicked. A man who did not rise was dragged away. Johann learned to move even when his body begged him to fall. Hunger as control. Food rations did not increase, even as work intensified. That was intentional. Weak men made obedient workers. Johann calculated every movement to save energy. He took smaller steps, lifted with legs, not arms, rested when guards looked away. Survival became a science. He watched men twice his size collapse within days. Strength meant nothing here. Intelligence did. The first beating. One afternoon, Johann stumbled. A stone slipped from his grip and shattered near a guard's boot. The guard turned. Without a word, he struck Johann across the face with a rifle butt. Pain exploded. Blood filled Johann's mouth. He did not cry out. Crying invited more blows. He stood, swaying, and continued working. That night, lying on the wooden plank, Johann touched his swollen face and thought, "This is how men disappear, quietly, stealing life back." In secret, prisoners helped each other. A whispered warning, a shared scrap of food, a moment of rest hidden behind rubble. Johann learned to trade favors, lifting for an older man one day, receiving a piece of bread another. Trust was dangerous, but isolation was fatal. Friendship here was not emotional. It was practical. Breaking point. One morning, Johann woke unable to stand. His legs trembled violently. His vision blurred. He thought, "This is it." But Friedrich, the old teacher, grabbed his arm. "Not today," he whispered. Johann leaned on him as they walked out, two broken men holding each other upright. That day, Johann worked slower than ever, expecting punishment. It never came, because the guards had grown used to broken men, and that terrified him more than cruelty. Losing the body, keeping the mind. By spring, Johann's body was thin as wire, bones visible, skin pale, but his mind hardened. He stopped thinking about freedom. He thought about lasting. One more day, one more breath. Because deep down, Johann sensed something changing. The guards were nervous. The sounds of war felt closer. Rumors whispered through the camp like ghosts. And for the first time in months, hope did not feel. Hope did not arrive loudly in the camp. It came as a whisper. A rumor passed from bunk to bunk, carried in lowered voices and careful glances. Some said the front was collapsing. Others claimed cities had fallen. No one knew the truth, but uncertainty itself felt like movement after months of stillness. Johann Keller listened more than he spoke. In a place where words could kill, silence was wisdom. The power of rumors. The guards had changed, not in cruelty, but in nervousness. They shouted more, counted prisoners twice, argued among themselves. Trucks came and went at odd hours. Johann noticed everything. Hope was dangerous, yes, but ignorance was worse. Men began to speculate. Maybe the war is ending. Maybe they'll move us. Maybe they'll kill us all. Each possibility carried its own terror. Resistance without weapons. There were no guns, no knives, no plans of escape. But resistance still existed. It was small. A man pretending not to understand an order. Another working just slow enough to delay progress. Someone hiding a tool to sabotage work tomorrow. Johann learned that survival itself was defiance. Every breath taken here was an insult to the system meant to erase them. The hidden network. Friedrich introduced Johann to a quiet group. Men who shared information, not rebellion. One had worked near a railway. Another cleaned guard quarters. A third handled supply carts. Together, they built a fragile picture of the outside world. The Allies were advancing. The front was unstable. Camps were being abandoned. Hope returned, thin, fragile, but alive. Punishment as a warning. Then came the warning. One morning, the entire camp was assembled. A prisoner stood alone in the yard, accused of stealing food. No trial, no defense. The guards beat him until he collapsed. The message was clear. Hope will be punished. Johann felt anger burn inside him, but he kept his head down. Defiance here required patience, not courage. The moral battle. Johann struggled with guilt. Was surviving worth watching others suffer? Was silence the same as surrender? At night, he replayed faces in his mind. Eric on the march, Karl in the barracks, nameless men buried by snow. Friedrich sensed his thoughts. "You don't survive for yourself," he said softly. "You survive for those who didn't." Those words stayed with Johann. Preparing for the unknown. Men began hiding scraps of food, conserving strength, choosing alliances carefully, not for escape, for what came next, because everyone sensed the same thing. The camp was no longer stable, and instability could mean freedom or annihilation. One night, Johann looked at the barbed wire glistening under moonlight and realized the war might end soon, but survival would still demand everything. The camp did not announce when it crossed the line from suffering into slow death. It simply slid into it. Spring came, but it brought no warmth, only mud, disease, and exhaustion that no longer faded with sleep. Johann Keller woke one morning unable to move, not because he was injured, but because his body had finally begun to shut down. When the body gives up, his hands trembled uncontrollably. His legs refused to obey. His vision blurred at the edges. Around him, men lay motionless on bunks, some sleeping, some not breathing. No alarms were raised. Death had become ordinary. Johann forced himself upright, gripping the wooden frame until splinters cut into his palms. Pain was proof of life. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not today." The vanishing. Men disappeared daily. Not dramatically, quietly. A bunk empty in the morning. A name no longer called at count. A blanket folded and reused. Johann stopped asking questions. Asking hurt. Hunger turned savage. Food rations shrank again. Soup became colored water. Bread became memory. Men chewed grass, tree bark, anything that fooled the stomach for a moment. Johann watched a man fight another over a potato peel. He did not judge. He understood. Friedrich's fall. Friedrich collapsed during work one afternoon. No warning, no final words. Johann ran to him, ignoring shouts. Friedrich's eyes were open, staring into nothing. "I remember. Books," Friedrich whispered. Then he was gone. Johann knelt beside him long after guards dragged the body away. The man who taught him survival through patience was gone. Something inside Johann died with him. The choice to live. That night, Johann considered giving up. Letting go would be easy. No pain, no hunger, no counting days. But Friedrich's words echoed. "You survive for those who didn't." Johann forced himself to eat, to stand, to breathe. Not for hope, for duty. The camp begins to crumble. The guards were panicking now. Orders changed daily. Trucks arrived late. Some guards disappeared overnight. Bombs thundered in the distance. The war was coming closer, or ending. No one knew which. Johann noticed gates left unlocked longer. Patrols thinner. Chaos had arrived, and chaos meant danger. But it also meant opportunity. Living on the edge. Johann learned to stay alert even while starving. To watch, to listen, to wait. Because survival here was no longer about endurance. It was about timing. And Johann Keller, once a simple soldier, had learned the hardest lesson of war. To live, sometimes you must outlast even death itself. It started with silence. No whistles, no shouting, no guards kicking bunks at dawn. Johann Keller woke up confused. For the first time in years, the camp felt empty. Men slowly sat up, unsure whether this was a trap or a dream. No one moved at first. Moving without orders had always meant punishment. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The guards are gone. Johann stepped outside the barracks. The watchtower was empty. The main gate, usually locked, guarded, feared, stood open. Some guards had vanished overnight. Others had fled days earlier. The system that controlled their lives had collapsed without warning. No announcement, no apology, no release papers, just absence, fear of freedom. Men did not cheer. They whispered, "What if they come back? What if this is bait? What if we leave and get shot?" Freedom was unfamiliar, dangerous. Johann realized something shocking. The camp had trained them to fear choice. First steps beyond the wire. Finally, one man stepped through the gate. Nothing happened. Another followed, then another. Johann felt his legs shake as he crossed the wire that had defined his existence. He expected pain, a bullet, a shout. There was none. For the first time in years, the sky felt wide. Chaos among survivors. Freedom brought confusion. Some men collapsed immediately, bodies unable to handle movement. Others argued about direction. Some cried openly. A few ran. Johann didn't. He knew survival wasn't finished. The world outside the camp was still war-torn, still dangerous, still hungry, searching for safety. Johann joined a small group moving cautiously toward a nearby village. Roads were broken, houses burned. Civilians stared at them like ghosts. Some slammed doors. Others quietly handed over water. Johann drank slowly, afraid his body would reject it. The war's final shadow. Gunfire echoed in the distance. Explosions rumbled far away. The war was not over everywhere. They were free, but not safe. That night, Johann slept in a ruined barn, staring at the roof. No barbed wire, no guards, no count. And yet, sleep did not come easily, because freedom, like survival, required learning. A new question. Johann realized the hardest part was no longer staying alive. It was answering a terrifying question. What does a man do after surviving hell? The camp was behind him, but its shadow still walked beside him. Freedom did not arrive as joy. It arrived as confusion. Johann Keller stood on the side of a broken road as Allied vehicles approached. Soldiers jumped down, shouting words of relief, waving, smiling. Johann felt nothing. His body was too weak to react, his mind too damaged to celebrate. When a medic placed a blanket around his shoulders, Johann flinched. Touch still felt dangerous. The shock of care. Food was offered. Real food. Johann's hands shook as he accepted it. He ate slowly, painfully aware that too much could kill him now. Men around him cried as they ate. Some vomited. Some collapsed. Survival had rewired their bodies. Kindness felt unreal. Doctors spoke gently, but Johann barely understood. Words drifted past him like smoke. "You're safe now. The war is over for you. You survived." Survived. The word felt heavy. Bodies that couldn't catch up. Johann spent weeks in a temporary medical camp. His weight barely increased. Muscles refused to return. Nightmares came every night. He woke screaming, sweating, reaching for walls that weren't there. No one laughed. Everyone understood. Freedom did not erase memory. The weight of missing time. Johann learned dates slowly. Years had vanished. Friends were gone. Family status unknown. Cities destroyed. He realized with quiet horror that the world had continued without him. Life had moved on. He had stood still in hell. Guilt of the survivor. Johann watched names written on lists. Men who would never return. Erich, Karl, Friedrich, Faces haunted him more than hunger ever had. Why him? Why did he walk free while stronger men died? No answer came, only silence. Learning to be human again. Simple tasks felt impossible. Choosing clothes, speaking freely, sleeping without orders. Johann felt exposed without barbed wire, directionless without routine. One evening, he sat outside the medical tent watching the sunset. Colors felt too bright. Freedom overwhelmed him. He realized survival had not ended at liberation. It had only changed form. A quiet promise. Johann whispered a promise to the empty air. I will remember, because memory was the only grave some men would ever have. Going home was harder than captivity. Johann Keller thought freedom would bring relief, but as he walked through the shattered remains of his hometown, he felt like a stranger trespassing in his own life. The streets were narrower, the buildings smaller, or maybe he had grown heavier with memory, a home that had changed. The house he grew up in was still standing, barely, a different door, a patched roof, windows replaced with boards. When he knocked, no one answered. A neighbor finally appeared. They moved, she said quietly. After the bombing, Johann nodded. He had survived years of hell, only to arrive too late. Reunions without words. Johann found his mother weeks later. She did not recognize him at first. Too thin, too quiet, too old in the eyes. When she did, she cried without sound and held him like she might lose him again. They did not talk much. Words failed where pain lived. A country of ghosts. Germany was full of survivors who did not feel alive. Men returned broken. Women carried loss silently. Children played among ruins like it was normal. No one asked Johann about the camp. Some stories were too heavy to share. Others didn't want to know. Living with the past. Johann tried to work, tried to sleep, tried to laugh, but loud noises froze him. Crowds suffocated him. Hunger still whispered at night. He hid bread in drawers, checked doors repeatedly. The camp followed him home. The question no one asked. Johann realized something painful. Survival didn't earn understanding. It created distance. People wanted the war to end. Johann knew it never truly does. It simply moves inside. A decision. One evening, Johann opened a notebook. For the first time, he began to write. Names, places, memories. Not for revenge, not for history, but because silence felt like betrayal. As his pen moved, Johann finally felt something close to purpose. Survival does not end when the war ends. Johann Keller learned this slowly, in quiet moments, in sleepless nights, in the long years that followed. The camp no longer existed, but it lived inside him. The long road back. Johann never became the man he was before the war. That man had died somewhere between hunger and frost. Instead, he became someone quieter, slower, more careful with life. He worked modest jobs, avoided crowds, spoke little about the past, but every night, before sleeping, he checked that there was bread in the house. Hunger never fully leaves. Memory as responsibility. Johann kept writing, not every day, but when memories became too heavy. He wrote names no one else remembered. Faces no photographs survived. Writing became his way of honoring the dead. If I forget, he once wrote, then they die twice. The meaning of survival. People often ask survivors, are you glad you lived? Johann never answered easily, because survival came with guilt. Why him? Why not Friedrich? Why not Erich? There were no answers, only responsibility. Teaching without words. Johann never became famous. He never spoke on stages. But when young people asked him about war, he told them only this. War does not make heroes. It takes people and returns shadows. That was enough. Peace at last. In old age, Johann sat by a window watching the world rebuild itself. Children laughed. Trains passed. Life continued. He breathed deeply, a luxury once denied. He had survived hunger, cold, fear, loss, not to be strong, but to remember. Final words. Johann Keller died quietly many years later. No medals, no speeches, but in his notebook, now fragile with age, were pages filled with truth. And because of that, none of them were truly forgotten.